hope you're doing well. Welcome back to the channel. So I have really wanted to start an official designated space for my commonplacing for a while now. And I've been thinking about how I want to set up my commonplace book for a while now, like several months at this point actually. And I've definitely been overcomplicating it. And I know this sounds silly, but I had this sort of exaggerated fear of doing it wrong and then having to move things or start over. So I felt this need to come up with the quote unquote perfect system, like whatever that means, right? But I felt like I needed to have this perfect system that would just work out immediately. And I think I felt this desire even more so with the commonplace because I have this vision of it being this long-term accumulation of knowledge that will last me for many, many years. And the thought of having it all stored in this comprehensive system that has a consistent order to it from the very beginning is a very enticing prospect to my perfectionism-inclined little brain. But if I think about it, that's not really how any of my notebooks or journals or planners have ever worked for me. It's always been a cycle of trying things out, making adjustments, and very slowly finding my way and learning what works for me. So I think I am ready to accept that my commonplace journey will likely follow a similar path. I will probably go through many different iterations before I figure out what I like. And that's okay. I am just going to experiment with a few things, see what I like, and enjoy the journey. So with all of that being said, I thought I'd talk about the beginning of my commonplace journey and where I am currently at as I step into this new chapter. So I first started commonplacing last year, just in my regular daily journal, which was my Hobonichi cousin. And for the most part, my commonplace entries were just related to something in my day, just something that I saw throughout my day that prompted a question in me. And then I would try to answer that question to the best of my ability by looking up information online. For example, I went to see the cherry blossoms at the University of Washington, and everywhere there were these signs that read, "Please don't touch our elderly trees." So my question then was, how old are they? And they're actually 90 years old, which is amazing. And then I read a little bit more about the cherry trees and how they grow and what type of cherry tree they are, and etc., etc. But the general pattern that I was following in my entries was that I saw something in my day, asked a question about it, tried to find the answer, and then in the process of finding the answer, formed more questions and seek more answers, and so on. You get the idea. It was really just a cycle of questions, following curiosity, finding answers, and then that just leading to more questions. And that was really it. I've been enjoying doing it that way so far, but I do really think that I would like to try giving my commonplace its own official home, separate from my journal space. And I think the main reason I want to do that is I'm going to start including more things in my commonplace that I would like to reference and look back at more frequently. And if they're just mixed in with my journal pages, especially a journal from last year that isn't currently in use anymore, that becomes a little difficult to do. So I'd like to instead try giving my commonplace its own official home, which is really the next stage of my commonplace journey that I am starting now. I was really considering using a rings binder for a while because I wanted to be able to move pages around and have the different categories separated and indexed and everything. But after making one page in my rings binder, I found that even though I love rings for how functional and flexible it can be, I've actually been using it for my planner for over half a year now. However, I don't exactly love the experience of writing in a rings binder. And I really want to enjoy the experience of writing in my commonplace, especially since I plan on doing a lot of long form writing in there. and the enjoyment of writing is kind of an important part of it for me. So what I ended up using instead is a traveler's notebook system. However, and I know this probably sounds a bit finicky, but I also wanted my commonplace to be in an A5 size because I wanted more room for writing and to place lots of photos. So what I ended up doing is making my own A5 inserts and putting them in an A5 size traveler's notebook cover. Making my own inserts was definitely a little challenging, but not too bad. I kind of got the hang of it after making a few, but what I did to make my own inserts is I got an A4 sized cream MD paper pad from JetPens. I printed my own grids on it, stapled it, and folded it in half, and then added a cover by taping two A5 sized pieces of cardstock together and stapling them to the book as well. I also printed some of my own artwork on the covers and labeled them Book 1, Book 2, Book 3, which I'll explain more of in a minute. But yeah, that was pretty much my process for making the inserts. And I do really like this method because even though I can definitely tell it's homemade, and hopefully I can get a little better at making these after a bit more practice. But even though it's not perfect, I can choose to use my favorite type of paper and my preferred grid size. And I am finding more and more that cream MD paper and a small grid size is just my absolute favorite place to be for writing, which again is kind of important to me since I really want to enjoy the experience of writing in my commonplace book. I also know that the MD paper will be able to handle pretty much anything I want to use on it. I can use fountain pens, markers, watercolor, pretty much anything, and the paper will hold up really, really well, which is a huge plus. So after I made my inserts, I needed to figure out how I was going to organize them. So originally I was thinking of using each insert as its own subject, but I think what I will actually do instead is consider each insert to be an open tab, kind of like a browser tab, if that makes any sense. That way I can potentially have up to 3 different entries that I'm concurrently working on at any given time. So for example, I have a book that I started reading and I can write about that in one insert. I have an art class that I started taking and I can take notes on that in another insert. I have some photos from a hike here that I want to finish sticking down and writing about, and I can have that in another insert. But I can actively be adding to each of these entries at the same time without needing to end one entry before starting a new, if that makes any sense. And I'm hoping it will mean that I can have longer entries without having to worry about allocating enough pages to finish the entry if I want to start a new entry. And I'm hoping that this will give me a lot more flexibility as I'm filling out my pages and adding in new entries. And then in order to actually be able to find things in my commonplace system, I'm thinking of dedicating one whole insert just as an index, like a master index or something. And you can see I've already labeled it here. But for example, each commonplace insert would be numbered book 1, book 2, etc. And then I would also number each entry within my commonplace books. So entry 1, entry 2, etc. So in order to reference those entries in my master index, I would call it book 1, entry 1, book 2, entry 2, book 2, entry 1, and so on. You get the idea. And I think I will actually just list them like chronologically in my index rather than like designating like one whole page to just one of my books or something like that, because I think it might be interesting to see how my interests change and develop over time, especially over a longer period of time, since it will probably take me a while to complete this index. There's actually like a decent amount of pages in here. But I think that seeing my interests develop over a longer period of time as I continue to add to my commonplace would be interesting to see. I only have a few entries in my commonplace so far, but so far I have some notes from an art class that I just started taking, which I am really enjoying so far. And I also have a bunch of photos from a hike that I went on that I've been trying to identify the different plants and insects and birds that I saw that day. And then I also recorded some information about the hike that we took as well, like the route, the distance, the elevation gain, stuff like that. But it was a really nice hike, so I got a lot of photos and video from that day. So it was nice to be able to record it in here. And I'm also trying to become more knowledgeable about the plants and animals that are native to my local area. And that is something that I really want to work on. So I thought this would be a good space to learn more about that. And then in addition to my actual like commonplace space where I do all of my commonplacing, I have a few accessory books that go along with that. I'll talk about this one in a minute, but this is my standard size traveler's notebook, which I have been using as a kind of like a captain's log, like a little daily log that I use throughout my day. I'm not going to share the pages in here because they are a lot more personal, but basically what I have in here is I do little mini entries throughout the day and I timestamp them. But in addition to doing those little mini captain's log style entries, I have also occasionally been writing down things that I want to commonplace about later on so that I don't forget them. And that's been really helpful. And I've just been marking those things with a little asterisk every time I write them down in here so that I can reference it back later on. But this is a relatively newer part to my system. I've been in here since the end of April at this point in time, and I've really been enjoying it. I'm actually almost done with my first insert at this point, so that's kind of exciting. But yeah, this has also just been a good space to record anything that I just find interesting throughout the day that I might want to come in here and commonplace about later on. And the nice thing about this size is that it's, at least for me, I think it's pretty easy to keep with me all the time. So this little book here is pretty much with me all the time. So that's why I'm starting out with my commonplace, but there's something else I'm also interested in trying alongside this as well. Kind of like an accessory book to the system. So for me, my commonplace will consist of a lot of long form writing and note-taking because that is part of how I process information. But I feel like I would also benefit from a more summarized and condensed version of those commonplace notes that I can review on a more regular basis. Almost like flashcards for studying or something. And I think a zettelkasten system might be a good way to do that. However, it's not exactly going to be a zettelkasten system. I am going to be changing it a bit to kind of fit my own needs. So as I understand it, a zettelkasten is traditionally just a note box. It's a box containing many individual notes written on note cards. And each of those notes contains a single idea or concept. And the idea is that as you continue to add new notes to your zettelkasten, you will begin to see connections emerge between your notes. And these notes will eventually form an interconnected web of ideas, which will help form new creative ideas. A lot of people do this digitally using something like Obsidian. However, I know myself and I do not reread digital files as much as I reread written information in my notebooks. I almost never reread digital files actually, but yeah, I am much more likely to flip through an old notebook than open old files on my computer. So for me, I would like this to be analog. I also know that I won't look at my note cards as often if they are stored in a box, so I am actually going to try putting them in a rings binder instead. And being able to review things often is important because memory aid is really one of the main reasons for having this little accessory book here. I have a horrible memory and I often forget a lot of what I read, but I am hoping that if I summarize key concepts from my commonplace entries and then add them to my note cards and make it a habit of flipping through them fairly often, I will actually remember the things that I really want to remember from, content that I consume, from what I read, from classes that I take, from just like quotes that I want to remember. I'm hoping that that increased familiarity with them just by like regularly seeing them and regularly flipping through the note cards will really help me kind of like remember and internalize the things that I want to remember and internalize. So how I picture this working is when I'm done with the commonplace entry, or even like while I'm writing a commonplace entry, if I find that there are certain things from that entry that I really want to remember and come back to often, I will make a note card for each of those concepts and then add it to my binder. And then I'd also like to reference the original commonplace entry so that I can kind of refer back to it if I want to. And yeah, that's basically how it should work. Hopefully that made sense. So for example, I started taking this art class, and there was a quote that was really good in the beginning, and I wanted to remember it. So I took the quote from here and I added it to my note card, and then I added it to my, I guess I'm calling it a zettelkasten inspired system, but it's just gonna be a little system of note cards in my little rings binder here. So I'm planning on having, so these are the little note cards that I made, and I've just been printing these on 4x6 matte photo paper. But I think like just a regular like flashcard paper would work just as well. Anyways, I've just got some grids on here and then a spot for the date, the time, and the reference number, and then space to write whatever my note will be on in the middle. And then just because I felt like it, I also added some visuals to it. This is a screenshot from the art class that I am taking. This is the quote from the art class, and then, you know, just for good measure, there's a little pusheen down here as well. But yeah, I only have the one note card so far. I've also got a few other things in here. I have a card design that I've been working on. I have some photos that I took from a hike. I was thinking of actually, I don't know how many of these I'll include, but I would like to learn more of the like plants and animals native to my area. So what I'd like to do is like take photos while I'm out and about, and then maybe come in here and label the photos so that I can like look at that regularly and kind of, you know, learn the plants that I'm seeing and animals that I'm seeing. So I have some of these in here. I just have a few from my last hike that I took. But yeah, I haven't actually labeled all of them yet, but I will come back in and do that. But yeah, that's really it. I just want to kind of slowly build up this little binder here with things that I want to view often and remember. And I think the long-term idea I have for this is to really think carefully about what information I want to keep front of mind. Like, what is the mental space that I want to curate for myself? What reminders would I benefit from seeing time and time again? Like the quote I have in here is about the importance of creating work that's interesting to you, and that you shouldn't only try to create what you think other people are expecting of you, which in a world where we have so many analytics and so much information about what we create and what we put out there and whether or not it's performing well, I think it's really important to remember. So I feel like that is something that I want front of mind. And I'm hoping that this book will become an accumulation of all of the things that I want front of mind. And not necessarily from only 1 year or any given time frame. I might have cards from several different years in here that I can reference and flip through often. But yeah, so that is my idea for this book. It is a honestly very lightly zettelkasten inspired book, but this is how I'm hoping that it will work so far. And I suppose I should also mention that I am kind of assuming, like, as I continue to make cards, like I will run out of space in this binder, and I will probably just store the ones that I want to keep front of mind in here and then have the others in storage somewhere. But yeah, so that's how I think this will work. I forgot to mention I also have some pockets up front here for space for photos. Like I have a bunch of photos from my hike in here that I didn't quite stick in yet. So they're just kind of sitting up here waiting for when I'm ready for them. Also, I'd like to add that there's something very satisfying about the sound of the like cardstock on the metal of the rings for some reason. It's a nice sound as I flip through it. I don't get this same satisfaction when I flip through like with my paper and my planner. It's kind of nice. The camera is probably not picking that up, but I don't know. Something about that is very satisfying to me. But yeah, that is everything I have for my little system so far. And I'm very excited to keep adding to it. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.